Hey there, this is Ann Teagarden with episode 25 of the Unveiled podcast. Thanks for joining me. Today's topic is letting go of being easily offended. Author John Bevere wrote a book entitled, and it's about offense, entitled The Bait of Satan. You know, that's what it is. It's one of the enemy's dangling worms to get us to bite, and then once we bite, it leads to strife and division. You know, could this be robbing your marriage of peace? Could it be affecting your relationships, your friendships? Letting go of offense is so freeing. God does not want us bound up and divided by stored up offenses. He tells us mercy triumphs over judgment. You know, when my kids were little, we memorized Proverbs 19:11, which says, "It is to one's glory to overlook an offense." I'd never really considered choosing to overlook offenses before. I come from a long family tradition of being easily offended, so it comes kind of naturally. But thankfully, over the years, I have learned to let things go. Maybe not everything, but a lot more than I used to. Sometimes, though, we feel like we have the right to be offended. You know, when someone's rude to us or mean. Now, don't get me wrong, I am not asking anyone to be a doormat. Big hurts and unforgiveness are another topic for another day. I'm mostly talking about the little things that get us all riled up and we end up offended. Like your husband didn't notice you had a new dress on, he forgot to take out the garbage, he didn't bring you flowers on your anniversary, he was short-tempered with you, maybe he even said something unkind. So, why should we overlook offenses? Well, it saves a whole lot of trouble and heartache when we give other people the benefit of the doubt. And because God calls us to. Remember, it is to one's glory to overlook an offense. Luke 6:28 tells us, "Bless those who curse you and pray for those who mistreat you." Don't you hate verses like that? My pastor used to say, I want to highlight those verses in black highlighter. You get it? Just mark them out. Proverbs 17:14 has good advice too. It says, "Starting a quarrel is like breaching a dam. So drop a matter before a dispute breaks out." When we get offended, we often reply with some sort of sarcastic remark, which then sets off a chain reaction of offense and hurt. It really is like breaching a dam. I used to tell my kids it's like a tennis match. If you don't return the ball, it just sits on the ground and that round is over. I'd say boink, boink, boink. The ball doesn't get returned over the net. So choosing to overlook an offense can spare us and the other person more hurt. If you think about it, holding on to offense in our hearts is really just a form of unforgiveness, which, as we know, leads to bitterness and resentment, which leads to broken relationships. So if you can learn to stop the cycle before you get too far into it, it'll be easier to handle. Wouldn't it be awful if some little offense ultimately ruined your relationship? Okay, for a moment, stay with me. Let me take you back to middle school because we all probably understand middle school girl drama. I had a group of about 5 girls that I hung out with every day in middle school. Well, one morning, Jennifer stopped me in the hall on my way to class and asked me if I liked her new eyeshadow. Well, silly me, I told the truth and said I couldn't really see it. After all, the hallway was pretty dark. I went on my way to class. Well, at lunch that day, I got yelled at by one of the other girls in the group about how insensitive and mean I am. I was shocked, and no amount of apologizing could fix it. They all decided to ignore me forevermore. My friends all disappeared over one instance of offense. What a waste. All right, that may seem petty, and it was, and we're not in middle school anymore, but I bring it up to show you how easily we can let something little become something huge, you know, a mountain out of a molehill. Our culture is hyper offendable these days, and I think sometimes we act like we're still in middle school. I love Graham Cook. He's one of my spiritual mentors, and he says we should become unoffendable. Okay, whoa, I'm still working on that one. But Graham tells this great story about a man who came up to him after a conference and very rudely criticized him. And Graham, I love this, he responded by saying something to the effect of, "Oh, sorry, you'll have to come back on Thursday to tell me that because I don't take complaints on Tuesdays." I love that. Graham had learned to listen only to God's correction and not react to rude people. The fun part is hearing Graham tell the story about the guy's response. He was flabbergasted and he had nothing further to say. Wasn't that a better witness by Graham than him saying something rude back to him? It reminds me of Ecclesiastes 10:4, which says, "Calmness can lay great offenses to rest." When we remain calm and refuse to be offended, we can lay the quarrel to rest. So that's why not to become offended. But I know what you're thinking. How in the world do we avoid being offended in the first place? As always, by looking at things totally differently. God's kingdom always asks us to do the opposite of the world's way. I always call it God's upside down kingdom. Like when he says, "Bless those that curse you." For example, Proverbs 17:9 says, "Whoever would foster love covers over an offense." I like how author Shanti Feldon says, she says, "One characteristic of highly happy marriages is that they give each other the benefit of the doubt." Okay, isn't that like covering over an offense? Well, what does it mean exactly? When your husband is cranky and he says something terse to you, give him the benefit of the doubt. Understand his stress level that day, or maybe something else is bothering him. Or question whether what he said was received as it was intended. Sometimes I'll ask my husband, "Why are you mad at me?" Only to have him tell me, "I'm not mad at you." Clearly, I mistook his tone or his words, but it's important to clarify it instead of getting offended. Another way to give the benefit of the doubt is by not judging the motives of the other person's behavior. We often think we know why someone did what they did, but I think often we don't. Once, this is a good example of it, we were working with a couple where the young man was very offended and his fiancée couldn't understand why. She had made an appointment for him to get his tux altered, and she just happened to be at the place, so she just did it for him and told him he was free to reschedule it if he didn't like that time. But he was really upset. Why? Well, after hearing them both explain, I asked him what he thought her motive was. Was she taking a load off of his plate? He said no, he felt like she was overriding him. She was in essence saying, "You can't do this, so I'll do it for you." And he felt disrespected. Now that was clearly not her motive. So don't assume a negative motive by the other person because it's usually not there. Clarify if you need to. Ask questions. It's often our expectations of others that set us up to be offended. So if you expect your husband to be chatty and emotional like women, we're going to be offended when they're not. But when we expect them to act like most other men do, we're not going to be nearly so offended. And lastly, it's important to be full of grace because God has given us his grace. All right, how many of us call a driver an idiot when they pull out in front of us in traffic? But then, a week later, we accidentally pull out in front of someone we didn't see. Oops. Everyone makes mistakes, and we can have grace. Husbands forget things. Husbands don't always notice things. Husbands can be cranky due to stress. Friends don't always say what we'd like them to say. It happens. But we can choose not to be offended and protect the relationship. We can choose to see them through God's eyes and look beyond their behavior and into their hearts. Proverbs 18:19 says, "An offended brother is harder to reach than a fortified city, and quarrels are like the bars of a fortress." So don't be that offended brother or sister. My husband may be clueless about what he did to offend me, but if I'm like a fortress, he's not going to be able to get through and resolve the issue. If we want to be happy and healthy, we must forgive those that offend us, and better yet, become unoffendable. So this week, I challenge you, determined to overlook most offenses for the entire week. Really focus on it. Refuse to be offended. I dare you. Thanks for listening. Help me get the word out about the podcast by sharing it with your friends. And if you have questions, feel free to email me at ANNE @synergiamm.com. Remember, you are loved. You are beautiful. You are enough. And you can soar on eagle's wings. Go in peace.